Think about the last horror movie that actually made you sweat. Was it a clown jumping out of a sewer? A guy in a mask? We usually think horror needs a massive monster or a ton of special effects to work. But back in 1902, an author named W. Jacobs wrote a short story called The Monkey's Paw that proved the scariest thing in the world isn't just a monster, it's getting exactly what you wished for. Before we look at why it works, let's break down what actually happens, because the plot is a masterclass in escalating tension. The story introduces us to the White family, Mr. and Mrs. White, and their adult son, Herbert. They live a quiet, cozy life in the English countryside until an old soldier friend visits and shows them a mummified monkey's paw. He claims that an old holy man in India put a spell on it to prove that fate rules people's lives and interfering with it only brings tragedy. The paw grants 3 separate men 3 wishes each, but the soldier warns them that it's cursed, and he even tries to burn it, but Mr. White saves it from the fire. As a joke, they wish for £200 to pay off their house, and the next day their son Herbert goes to work at a factory, and a representative comes back with horrible news. Herbert was caught in the machinery and killed. The twist? The company refuses to take the blame, but offers the family a sympathy payment of exactly £200. Broken by grief, the mother forces the father to use their second wish to bring their son back from the grave. Late that night, a slow knocking begins at the front door. Knowing that whatever is outside has been rotting in a grave for a week, Mr. White panics and uses his final wish to make it disappear right as his wife gets the door open. Now, a lot of people might assume a story this old can't compete with modern horror films. However, when looking at the text, it's clear that The Monkey's Paw is a highly effective example of horror as a genre because it follows a tight 3-act tragic formula, relies on a brilliant, quiet misdirection to build tension, and masterfully plays on the instinctive fear of losing a loved one. To break this down, let's look at my first point, the story's structural perfection. According to our class notes, a successful horror story needs a central theme, a tragic event, relatable characters, and a clear 3-act formula that wraps up with a lesson learned. Jacobs uses this exact structural formula to ground his narrative. We see this loop during the absolute peak of the 3rd act. As the knocking grows louder and his wife finally manages to slide the front door bolt open, Mr. White realizes he has to stop this nightmare. The text states, he found the paw and frantically breathed his 3rd and last wish. Instantly, the knocking stops, the door opens, and there is nothing there but an empty, quiet street. This moment resolves the central problem, but it leaves both the characters and the audience completely shattered. The lesson learned is devastatingly clear and fits rule number 1 of writing spooky stories. Death is inevitable, fate cannot be cheated, and human greed will always ruin you. Because Jacobs doesn't overcomplicate things and sticks to this basic structural formula without adding unnecessary subplots, the story lands with a clean, powerful narrative arc. Now, this is where a lot of modern audiences doubt older literature. A skeptic might argue, but wait, nothing actually happens. We never even see a zombie or a ghost on screen. How can a story be scary if it's just 2 old people talking in a house? However, that is exactly why the story is a masterpiece. Rule number 4 of horror writing tells us that effective fear isn't always about loud jump scares. Sometimes it's about misdirection, lights and shadows, and keeping things simple and quiet. Jacobs utilizes this rule to absolute perfection during the final climax. After Mrs. White demands the second wish, a strange knocking begins downstairs. Jacob writes, a 3rd knock sounded through the house. He heard the chain rattle back and the bottom bolt drawn slowly and stiffly from the socket. Notice what Jacobs is doing here. He completely redirects your attention away from the visual gore and forces you to focus entirely on tiny, mundane sounds. Because it is simple and quiet, the suspense builds to an unbearable level while Mrs. White struggles with the lock. By never opening the door to show us the mutilated, resurrected corpse of Herbert, Jacob activates the excitation transfer process in our brains. Our minds are forced to fill in the blanks, creating a personalized image of terror that is way scarier than any practical movie prop. The silence and isolation of the setting doesn't weaken the horror, they are the exact reasons it still works. Finally, let's take a look at the strongest piece of evidence, the psychological stakes. According to our class notes, the more people the protagonist has to keep safe, the higher the stakes are, and horror reaches its absolute peak when the danger threatens a loved one rather than just the main character. Jacobs uses this exact rule to build pathos, the rhetorical appeal to emotion. He makes us care about this small family so that the horror hits twice as hard. Look at how the story delivers the consequence of the first wish. The factory messenger arrives at the house and states that Herbert was mangled by the machinery, and the company disclaims all responsibility, but they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation. Think about how brutal that is. Jacobs doesn't have a ghost show up and haunt the house. Instead, he targets the audience's instinctive real-world fears, the sudden and violent loss of a child. This triggers an immediate survival response in your mind. Your adrenaline spikes because the monster isn't an alien or a vampire, it's a terrifyingly realistic tragedy. By making the price of the wish the life of your only son, the stakes become impossibly high. This proves that the story isn't just trying to startle you, it's aiming for a deeper psychological horror that plays on our deepest vulnerabilities. Ultimately, W.W. Jacobs' The Monkey's Paw remains a highly successful example of the horror genre. By sticking to a flawless 3-act tragic formula, using quiet misdirection to build unbearable tension, and raising the emotional stakes through relatable family trauma, it accomplishes exactly what a horror story is designed to do. It proves to us that we don't need monsters or witches or slashers to experience genuine heart-pounding terror. Sometimes the most frightening thing in the entire universe is simply our own human desires turned against us.